21 years in the state legislature there in Frankfort. Let's talk just a little bit about your background. You are from Pike County, from Virgie. Tell us who your parents are and where you grew up.
My father was Clayton Little. He died in '87. He was a coal miner, retired UMWA coal miner, always a very staunch Democrat, a hard-working Democrat in Pike County. However, no member of my family had ever sought a political office until I ventured into the political arena and pitched my hat in and won, although many people thought I couldn't, and I've never lost an election. I've been glad of that. My mother was Elsie Tackett, and of course her father was a merchant in Pike County for many years, and 5 children in my family. I have a brother and sister older than me and a brother and sister younger than me. So I was right in the middle both ways, you might say. And of course I went to the one-room schools and lived the life of the common folk in Pike County all of my life, and just glad to be that kind of individual, and glad to take that sort of heritage to the Kentucky legislature.
Certainly not one of those politicians who grew up with a so-called proverbial spoon in their mouth. You grew up in the working class of people, so you can identify with those people and know what their needs and their wants and their desires are.
Well, you know, I've always said that government belongs to its people, and it only belongs to its people if the people they represent take their voice.
Absolutely. Clayton, you, of course, in addition to being a Kentucky state legislator and have been that for the past 21 years, you're also actively involved as an educator in the Pike County, Kentucky schools. Tell us about that, how long you've been with the school system, and what your position is.
Well, really, I've worked for the school system 2 different times. I began teaching in a 2-room school, Don, back in the 50s, and I worked 5 years. I later quit there and worked with a department store chain for 10 years. I quit and went back to college, got my degree, and went back to work for the Pike County Board in 1968. I'm Director of Health and Social Services and also Supervisor of Vocational Education in the Pike County school system. This is a new assignment for me, and one that I certainly welcome, because with all the things that we did in CARA and education reform, I feel that a great deal of that probably would not have needed to have come about if we had been more cognizant, if you will, of the needs of children and trained them to in the field of work. You know, I notice even today in the Pike County school system that many of the guidance people will boast of sending 80% of the high school graduates to college. But the truth is, from 18 to 20% is all that graduate. They'll go and spend a year or so, and then they return home. And really, a college, as a freshman, doesn't train you to work. A vocational school almost guarantees you a job. For example, Mayo Vocational School down in Johnson County has a 97% placement, of job placement for the students who graduate there. A high school has 0%, and a college has 0%. So, you know, really and truly, we sort of miss the boat when we don't train children in the field that they can achieve. We really hurt parents. We'll take a coal miner and have him to pump down $10,000 to send his child to college when the child probably wasn't college material in the first place. And so really we have missed the boat, and I hope to be able to bring some of that into true focus as supervisor of vocational education in Pike County. And that probably prompted me just a little to leave the Kentucky legislature, because I had in 21 years there, as you said, and I believe that, again, that government belongs to its people. And as I look at those people who vote for me in an election are generally between, you know, maybe, just maybe, I may not represent the true interest of the body that elects me. So, you know, I hope that my judgment is right in that respect, and then another person might bring a different perspective. Is the issues that I've talked about in my tenure in the General Assembly have been the protective measures, if you will, for the people who live here. And you know, many of the proposals that I have sponsored are now on the statute books of Kentucky, and And so it may be a time for another thinking, but I hope that thinking doesn't forget the real needs of the people who live in Pike County.
Absolutely. Now, you talked that you are the administrator, supervisor with the vocational schools in Pike County, Kentucky. Is all of the county covered with vocational schools? Are there vocational schools in just about every section of the county?
We have vocational school at Belfry, we have one at Phelps, and we have one at Millard. So every high school in Pike County is covered with a vocational school. Now, hopefully we'll have groundbreaking sometime in the month of April or May for a new Shelby Valley High School that I might sound boastful, but I did get $4 million put in the budget in 1990 and the enactment of CARA that would bring about a new vocational facility for Shelby Valley high school that would certainly help that area up there. Of course, it'll be a state school in which you can have night classes for the adult population in welding or whatever. So we'll be able to be training adults there also.
Now, when you talk about CARA, of course, that's the Kentucky Educational Reform Act. That was passed, what, in 1990?
1990,
So we're now 4 years into the program of the reform of the educational system in the state of Kentucky. As an educator and a supervisor for the Pike County Schools, Clayton, do you think this CARA program is on schedule? Is it moving the way that it was originally hoped that it would when it was first instigated about 4 years ago?
You know, you're talking to someone now who's not an absolute avid supporter in every respect of CARA. I believe we need to listen to the will of people, and of course, the non-graded primary is ahead of its time for Pike County, in my honest opinion. And we had 27 different amendments filed during this session to let the school system go back to its traditional methods if it wanted to, or to let a site-based council choose what sort of curriculum that you had. And none of those amendments passed, and I would have voted for any of them because, you know, I believe that to change education, you first have to change the way teachers are taught to teach. And to tell a teacher who's been in teaching for 25 years is, you know, you've got to change your method, you've got to go to an ungraded primary, you're probably doing that teacher an injustice, and you're certainly doing the students an injustice. So maybe that needs to be phased in a little slower with newer people who come out of college who have been taught to teach in a different perspective. So my honest opinion is, you know, you ask if CARA is on target, if we're doing what we're supposed to. We're doing what the law requires, but the law may have required a little too much in some areas, in my honest opinion.
Clayton, was one of the original intents of CARA, the Kentucky Education Reform Act of 1990, to make all of the schools of Kentucky on more of an equal parity basis, that say a school which would be located, say, like in Feds Creek in Pike County, Kentucky, that they could give the same equal opportunity education to somebody, say, that is attending a school in Fayette County, in Lexington, or in Jefferson County, in Louisville?
That was the idea when we passed it, but, you know, dollars don't guarantee the same quality of education. Of course, you know, while you put in additional dollars, we have increased teachers' pay immensely all across Kentucky, you may say. But as far as the dollars that go into programs, the greater dollars have gone into building, like Pike Central and Shelby Valley, and they're now talking of a Cumberland Valley School somewhere to consolidate Elkhorn, Feds Creek, and Millard. And you know, here again, you're talking to someone who's been around a while, and I happen to be one of those that sometimes think maybe that bigger doesn't necessarily mean better. And by that I'm saying that as I look at Pike Central, and it's a very, very nice plan up there, but then I also note that Pike Central has about $600,000 additional cost to Pike County, and you know, just to maintain the plant and the teachers, the administrators, the additional transportation, whatever. I think that's a figure that they've given me. And you know, if we continue to develop schools, it's going to add another $600,000 just maintenance alone. There's going to come a time when Pike County can't afford it.
Bigger can also bring with it bigger problems.
Absolutely, you're right. You're right. You consolidate the bad. You may bring on additional training opportunities for some students, but you do consolidate the bad also along with the good. It does give greater opportunity and a wider variety of curriculum and all those things. And so I guess I run with my brakes on.
All right. Now, we talked about your position with the Pike County Schools, being a supervisor, working with the vocational schools in the county. It was 21 years ago that you went from Virgie, Kentucky down to Frankfort, Kentucky in the state legislature in Frankfort, and have been there 21 years representing the 93rd Congressional District. When we talk about the 93rd Congressional District, geographically, what areas are we talking about, Clayton?
Well, you know, it takes in all of Shelby Valley and Elkhorn Creek. It takes in from Millard community up through Regina, all of Maribon. Takes in Furls Creek, Feds Creek, Grapevine, all of Peter Creek, the Phelps Majestic communities, and also Blackberry, the 23 precincts. And they really, I represent rural Pike County, if you will. Representative Deskins has the city of Pikeville. I do not represent Pikeville. My district's all rural. Elkhorn City is the only township in the district.
State representative from the 93rd Congressional District, representing Eastern Kentuckians in the Kentucky State Legislature in Frankfort, Kentucky for the past 21 years. So that was what, 1970 when you were?
73 is when I was elected. I went in office in January 1, 74, and I will leave office December 31, 94, which will be a total of 21 years.
Yeah, 21 years. Who was the governor of Kentucky when you were elected, Clayton?
Wendell Ford.
Wendell Ford was the governor at that time, and of course Burton Jones, the governor of the state of Kentucky when you'll be going out. You've seen a lot of changes, I'm certain, in that 21 years. A lot of laws have been passed, a lot of bills have been passed that you have voted on. What would you say has been the highlight of your career there in Frankfort?
You know, of course, a week or so ago, I said the greatest highlight of my career came with the passage of the gas and oil bill. I know that I'd worked on other bills awfully important, like the Broad Form Deed Amendment, but I guess the highlight of my career really was about 10 days ago when I had filed for 12 years straight a bill that would restrict the provisions of the Broad Form Deed for gas and oil. Now, that was in the Broad Form Deed Amendment that I sponsored in '88 that passed, but they exempted gas and oil out of that amendment. And basically, what the gas and oil amendment will do, it will prohibit a gas company now from you coming home and finding out that they have a dozer on your property. To get the gas drilling permit, they'll have to have a signed permission from the surface owner. Now, to get that permission, then they'll have to negotiate, if you will, with the surface owner on where the roads and lines and so on go. And that's what's so important, because the surface owner pays the property tax down at the courthouse on that surface. But yet, if you permit them to run a line through your garden, as it is in Pike County, that means that you can't let your son or daughter park a mobile home there because it would be over a gas line. The law prohibits that. So it prohibits you from using your property the way you would like to. So I've always felt that the fair thing to do would be to deal with that surface owner, and if it meant that we run that line down by the fence row, if you will, and not run it through the center of a vacant lot, that it really wouldn't hurt the surface owner too much, and may be a little more expensive to the gas companies, but by the same token, they owe the property owner something if he's the person who pays the tax. So I guess I say to you, the highlight of my political career was when that bill passed the House floor. I had a standing ovation from everybody in that body, because they knew how diligently and how I'd stuck to the task of trying to see that I could bring that about. And of course, in the final days of my legislative career, to come through and get a standing ovation from a body, not because all of them really thought that what I was doing was right, I don't suppose, but you know, not one person voted against it, because I think they respected the efforts that I had put into it, and every person got to their feet to applaud when the bill passed. And that in itself was something that could get you a little temperamental, I guess.
Absolutely. Congratulations, State Representative Clayton Little, the passage of the oil and the natural gas bill. I guess If that is the highlight, then certainly the passage of the constitutional amendment in 1988 to the broad form of deed amendment has to be the second highlight. Is that correct?
Well, let's go back to the broad form deed. The first bill I ever signed on to sponsor, 1974, was House Bill 9. And it required at that time a notarized statement from the surface owner that you know, before you could strip on his property. And Wendell Ford signed that bill, and coal operators took it to court, and it was declared unconstitutional. Again,
when you say take it to the court, I don't mean to interrupt you, but you mean take it to the Kentucky State Supreme Court?
Yes,
State
and it
Supreme
was
Court.
declared unconstitutional.
And I think this is going to be the thing that we consistently see through your efforts here, is that the Supreme Court constantly, the courts constantly sided with the coal operators and what the mineral owners.
That's exactly right. So ran that bill again in '76, I believe. It was House Bill 32. And, you know, somehow or other, it passed, and it was declared unconstitutional. Well, at that time I knew that the only thing that we could do was if a judge decided, and he always sided with the court, and their excuses they would always give me was, you know, the Constitution says you can't void a contract. Well, this is one of the things that caused me to say that experience helps a little. Because I said, well, you know, if the judge has to side with the coal company because of the Constitution, if the Constitution was made and written by men, and let's just change the Constitution. And I know it seemed like a way out idea, but I filed a bill with a constitutional amendment with the same language in it that had been declared unconstitutional in the '76 bill. But lo and behold, when I finally filed that bill and got it moving, that they exempted gas and oil from that amendment. The only way I could get it passed across the House floor, because gas interest was pretty strong. And so I went on with only dealing with coal. But we did get that thing on the ballot, and it did stand the constitutional test here 3 weeks ago, but it did pass by 82% vote here in Kentucky. The people felt that it was that wrong, and yet the courts had been overturning every bill you had passed dealing with that. But here 3 weeks ago, the Supreme Court, not the state Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court, held the Kentucky Constitutional Amendment valid. And so that ended that battle. It's over and done with. It's gone to the highest court you could take it to, and was declared constitutional.
The United States Supreme Court in Washington, D.C.,
yes.
And that's only about 3 weeks ago now that they ruled on the constitutionality of the 1988
That's
Kentucky Broad Form Deed Amendment. The coal operators and the mineral owners were still fighting that constitutional amendment, which had been approved by over 80% of the voters back in '88. They still were trying to overturn it and appealed it to the United States Supreme Court, which refused to hear the case.
So it shows that they'll go to any end to circumvent the law, really, and that's what was happening. Of course, you know, really and truly, here in Pike County, since we began working on the broad form deed, Don, and I'm sincere about this, is I have found that you know, when the thing was declared unconstitutional the second time, by that time, the coal operators had really began to take a new look at what they were doing. They become a little more considerate of the surface owners, and really the broad form deed, it came into play, but it was 20 years late. But the operators had already sort of been educated to the fact that somewhere down the road, and they had become more considerate of the surface owners even when we enacted it.
Clayton, am I right when I say that the state of Kentucky was the last state in the nation to outlaw the broad form deed?
You're right.
The last state in the nation.
That's right.
Before Kentucky, the state legislators, people that are in your position, say in the state of Virginia or in the state of West Virginia, it was the state legislators, the state senators, the state representatives themselves who outlawed the broad form deed.
That's correct.
Here in Kentucky, it was not the governmental body in Frankfort that did it. The courts constantly coincided with the mineral owners. Here it took a constitutional amendment, the voters of the state of Kentucky themselves. Why, Clayton, did it take the people to do it and not the people in Frankfort?
Well, here again, I said that, if the judges can't decide because it's a constitutional problem, and may have been, I don't know, but it finally dawned on me that if they felt that strongly about the same contract they had in Indiana, because the law we passed was a law that's held valid in Indiana, but in Kentucky it couldn't stand the test of the courts, so we just changed the Constitution to where the judge didn't make that decision. If he's making it on the Constitution, we'd make the Constitution fit our needs, and that's exactly what we did.
Well, I think there in 1988, when the constitutional amendment was passed, certainly the voters of Kentucky, the people of Kentucky, showed how they felt about it all along, because like you said, there was 82% of the voters that voted to approve that constitutional amendment to pass the broad form deed amendment.
That's correct.
Let's talk a little bit about that broad form deed amendment. Now, it doesn't prohibit mining on property. What it does is it prohibits strip mining unless there is the express consent of the surface owner. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. We didn't prohibit them from getting their coal. We forced them to live with the contract as our forefathers perceived, that they could mine by the methods that were commonly used at the time that the instrument was prepared. That's the broad form deed. Now, and there was no strip mining at that time and no destruction of surface.
What years were those broad form deeds created there, Clayton?
Oh, I've probably studied those things as much as anybody in the county, and I've looked at them from around 1892, and some of them ran on up through 1925. But the thing that always bothered me about them, and I use this as illustration sometimes, was I would take a copy of a broad form deed that would have a person's signature, have a person's X on it, an X that was typed with a typewriter, and then have written above it and under it her mark or his mark. And I wondered how that my great-grandfather, who never saw a typewriter, who certainly could never use one, could make an X and then verify that it was his mark. By that I'm saying there's a lot of bogus deeds in the broad form deed, because those things were not right. They were not initiated in 1892 when they didn't have typewriters around, and everything was longhand primarily, but then the X would be with a typewritten. So, those things didn't happen, and I know that, and it would appear to me the judge would have known that.
Well, you talk about the county judges, and of course, back then, at the turn of the century, in the 1890s, whatever the county judge or whatever the local pastor, the local minister of the church told those people, that's what they tended to believe.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, we're talking here about, I guess John C. Mayo was probably one of the main people who started.
He's one of the purchasers of the broad form deed through our area, yes.
And how much was this coal bought for under the broad form deed?
Oh, it ranged anywhere from 10 to 50 cents an acre. That's an acre.
10 to 50 cents an acre.
Yes.
And compare that with what the value of that coal would be today. I've always likened it, Clayton, to say the gold rush out in California or wherever. If you had the property, heck, you own the gold. It was yours. And here it's a paradox. I think it's a paradox in our eastern Kentucky mountains here that natural gas, oil, and coal, this has got to be, as far as minerals are concerned, one of the richest places on the entire earth. And yet, we have to have a lot of government programs to supplement our people and sustain our people here. But
Don, really and truly, and I'm not talking about my forefather because he sold mineral rights from the property that I now own. Really and truly, here in the mountains was the richest deposits of coal anywhere in the world. And yet our people were probably the least educated. And so you come with a contract that they couldn't read, and so someone would have to read it to them. Maybe all the things that's in the contract weren't read. And, that could have happened. But then there's another thing that I look at, and that's this. Is I know at that times were pretty tough. And in all probability that if my great-grandfather hadn't been able to have survived by selling off his mineral rights, then if he hadn't been able to have survived, then I probably never would have come to this world. So maybe those minerals that he sold
Yeah.
was part of my reason for being here.
Absolutely, yeah.
It was a grub stake, really.
A grub stake, that's
Yes.
a good terminology, a good way of using it. But certainly, you know, your forefathers, my forefathers, they never realized what would later happen in the 1950s, that we would have the strip mining and the mountaintop removal. This was never envisioned by these people, and they had a love of the land, Clayton. You know that they had a love of the land. They were farmers. They were close to God's earth. They were farmers, and they would never have sold that coal if they had known that the mountaintops would be totally torn off and removed.
Absolutely not. No, no. They would not have.
Well, the broad form deed amendment passed in 1988. Strip mining, of course, still goes on, but the coal operator certainly has to have the signature, the permission of the surface owner before any strip mining can be done anywhere at all in the state of Kentucky.
That's correct. That's correct.
All right. Well, let's talk about another measure that you've been instrumental in Frankfort. We talk about the natural gas, and we've talked about the oil regulations that were just passed during this Kentucky State Legislature in 1994. We've talked about the broad form deed constitutional amendment passed in 1988. Let's talk about the unmined minerals tax. Now,
the unmined minerals tax is one of the things that I probably got roughed up over as much as anything since I've been in the General Assembly. But, you know, it bothered me somewhat to see that 97% of the coal that's owned in Pike County is owned by out-of-state corporations. It bothered me to see that I would step down to the courthouse and pay the property tax when they were able to come on it and destroy my surface, and that was before the broad form deed passed, is they could do with my surface what they wanted to get their minerals, and yet they paid no tax, none whatsoever. So far as I was concerned, if it was covered in a deed at the courthouse, and the broad form deeds were covered by deed in the courthouse, that they needed to step to the same courthouse that I did and pay property tax, because minerals were property just the same as was surface. And it bothered me, you know, when I saw that they didn't do that. And of course, I put every provision possible in the bills that I sponsored to protect our local people, you know. Bills that would say, and that's what they're living with today, that, you know, you'd classify coal in 3 different classifications. You would classify it as active mining reserves, or unminable. Now, the unminable would be that the private citizen in Pike County owns that don't want their surface destroyed, and so then it was unminable. So they didn't have to pay tax on it. It was just there, but didn't mean anything to them. Now, if they ever leased that, then it would become active mining reserve. And at that point, they would have to go back and pay tax on it, and should. The broad form deed coals would all be active mining reserve unless it was permitted. Because if they bought the minerals to mine, then it would have to be active mining reserve, since they didn't buy the property. The minerals is what they wanted. So then the active mining would be that's permitted and producing. So that rate would be higher than the active mining reserve, which, you know, made everything was fair. And that's what they're living with today. Of course, you know, many coal operators would say that they were already paying tax and what have you. It didn't affect Pike County coal operators, because they didn't own the minerals anyway. They were leasing from another company. And I had coal operators say to me, but they'll pass that tax on to me. And so I said, well, you know, if you're foolish enough to sign a contract and let them pass it on to you, then so be it. You don't have to do that. And the other thing that the unmined minerals tax would do, Don, is this. It forced companies that had the minerals under the broad form deed that wasn't paying any tax, once it become a cost factor, if they had to pay something, then they would sublease the coal in order to get it mined, so they wouldn't have to pay the tax. So really, I looked at it as a way to loosen up, if you will, the coal business in eastern Kentucky. And of course, I checked with, believe it or not, I checked with our finance officer with the local board of education just yesterday, and I learned that Pike County schools last year got $1.3 million unmined minerals tax into the school system last year. Now, I understand that the fiscal court, the first unmined minerals tax they ever received, they put $500,000 into the Mossy Bottom industrial park up here. So that money is awfully important to Pike County. And it really doesn't cost Pike County. As I know, I worked with a fellow not too long ago from over in Peter Creek who was having a problem because the revenue cabinet had taxed him for minerals that that were unminable. And so he called me on it, and I got with the revenue cabinet, and they called him back immediately and said, you know, we'll send you a letter retracting. You don't owe this because it's not mineable. So our people, the surface owners who are not in the business of mining, they can certainly get exempt except 0.1%, which is really nothing as far as on my minerals are concerned.
Let me have that figure that you threw at me there just a moment ago, Clayton. How much of the coal reserves in Pike County are owned by out of the area?
Why, just 97%.
And these are people who don't live in Pike County, Kentucky, who don't pay
Many
taxes
of them are
in
foreign
Pike County.
companies. There's a company from Australia that owns coal in Pike County. No, they're not Pike Counties. Most of them are not even in the United States.
And that coal that is lying in the ground, even though it is hasn't been mined yet, it is still wealth. It's the same as money in the bank that you got to pay taxes on if you have money in your savings account.
Absolutely. And see, if it doesn't cost them anything to keep it, then they can just hold it because the price is always going up. So I look at this as a measure to force loosening up of some blocks of coal so our people could mine and have some jobs. It
seems to me also, Clayton, that this is a way of bringing back a little bit of money back to the county that has been taken out.
Absolutely. You know, it's what I've always said is you know, you can talk about the wealth of Pike County, but the wealth of Pike County is underground, and our people didn't mine it and nobody paid tax on it. So, you know, if you have to pay on that which you own, the tangible property, then coal is certainly a taxable item and ought to be, and gas also. You know, that's tangible things. They need to be taxed. You know, just last week, if I can talk to you about the budget, well, I know I'm advancing, but in about 78, it could have been 80, I don't remember, the years run together when it gets that far back, I know it's when the coal boom was on and we were really, you know, trying to help coal companies, if you will.
Early 70s probably, wasn't it?
We enacted, or they did, I didn't vote for it, but we enacted legislation that exempt manufacturing equipment from sales tax. Now, when you talk about manufacturing equipment, you're talking about a long wall machine, you're talking about a cutting machine, you're talking about a tractor or a combine, you're talking about an assembly line for Toyota or Ford. You're talking about an assembly line for GE in Louisville. You're talking about all the manufacturing things. We exempt those from sales tax. All right? That's at a time when the price of coal was high, severance tax you were generating was good, and really the state did that to sort of cushion those businesses. Well, came along this time, the business is not quite so good in Kentucky. The revenue projections were very bleak, and the House tried to write into the budget bill, if you will, to bring back some of the tax on those items. And it's only on replacement items, not a new item, replacement item. You know, if you had to replace something, you pay sales tax. And we also raised the property tax because we had exempt that. We had taken their property tax assessment back down to 0.1%. Well, we tried to raise that back. Of course, the Senate revolted. They didn't want to put any tax back on. Well, I recall last Friday, if you will, that I took a blistering attack to that on the House floor because I said, let's look at the little old lady that works at McDonald's, and she has 2 children. She gets off at 10 o'clock and she goes by Walmart and she picks up a box of Tide. And she goes home to wash her children's clothes so she can have them back in school at 7 o'clock the next morning. Now remember, she's working for minimum wage, if you will, at McDonald's. But we imposed a penny additional sales tax on her Tide in 1990 so we could educate her children. But by the same token, we would let a company from Australia come to Pike County, put in a long wall machine, lay off 125 Pike County coal miners, operate it with 8 people, and pay no sales tax on their equipment. Now, when we removed the tax in 1978, I said at that time that we should have been tarred and feathered. But if we permit additional sales tax to be imposed on people like the little lady that works at McDonald's, and we exempt a farmer who will buy a $190,000 combine or a cutting machine for coal from an out-of-state company, or Toyota, that tarring and feathering is not good enough. We need to be burned at the stake. And I truly believe that, because I think that we need to look after Kentuckians first.
Kentuckians. Absolutely. Now, there's a group called Kentuckians for the Commonwealth that has as one of their main purposes looking after Kentuckians first. And has that organization been working with you on passage of this oil and gas bill?
Well, Kentuckians for the Commonwealth come to Frankfort each session, and they look after people's interests, and so they're very close associates of mine. I'm certainly not controlled by them. I'm controlled by the common folk who live in Pike County. And it just so happens that the Kentuckians for the Commonwealth ideas are generally that of the common folk of Pike County.
I know that, you know, even back before the passage of the Broad Form Deed Amendment there in 1988, Clayton, that even going back further than that, and back quite a few years before the group Kentuckians for the Commonwealth was created, that the ravages of strip mining and mountaintop removal there in the 1950s, that back then there was a group called Kentuckians to Save the Land and the People.
I think there's something. I know the Kentucky for the Commonwealth, they organized in 1982, but at that time they were called the Fair Tax Coalition, and then they changed their name, become a corporation sometime around 86 and become Kentuckians for the Commonwealth.
The reason I was mentioning that group, Kentuckians for the Land of the People, is I did an interview with Eula Hall up here at the Mud Creek Clinic not too long ago, and Eula was talking about that group, and she apparently was a very active member of that, and she showed me some books and newspaper articles and clippings where she had actually sat down in front of a bulldozer to stop a bulldozer from doing strip mining, and she was talking about Jink Ray from Island Creek.
Oh, sure, I know Jink.
Did you know Jink?
Sure, I know Jink. I knew him well. I knew him well. In fact, he used to come and see me and call me back there in the early 80s, because he had had some strip mine trouble on the head of Island Creek, and he was very interested in the legislation that we passed in 82.
Yeah. But that was, I think he had an intervention of the governor who actually intervened in Jink Ray's property up there on Island Creek. And, well, the coal companies didn't strip mine Jink Ray's property on Island Creek. They might have stripped mine the rest of the county, but they didn't touch Jink's property up there on Island Creek.
I knew Jink. I knew him real well.
Yeah, he passed away recently.
Recently.
Not too long ago, so. We talked about unmet minerals tax. We've talked about the broad form deed. What about this coal severance tax, and how is that working for the people back in Pike County?
Coal severance tax, in my opinion, the last bill we filed was not really what I wanted, and I don't care to tell you. Of course, it seems like I'm always off the beaten path of politicians. Being one, I shouldn't be that way, but I generally am. I was on the commission that worked out the bill to return coal severance tax to the county of origin. But I differed with the committee, and differed pretty violently, because the return of coal severance tax, we left 12% of that at the county fiscal court's discretion. But the other money would have to be used in industrial development. Now, you know, you couldn't spend anything on coal. Coal related, that's an industry, but you're supposed to forget it. And while we have enacted legislation that raised workmen's compensation rates and so on to sometimes it's prohibitive and would really cause some coal operators to go out of business, is I felt like that because of the special fund and the surcharges that we were placing on companies, that it wouldn't be a bad idea to use some of that money as cushion money, if you will, to help bail out the ailing workmen's compensation fund, so the coal operators' rate wouldn't be assessed an extra 63% over what they were paying. And of course, nobody agreed with that, but it looked to me like a way to help a business that was thriving and a business that was providing jobs for people, and good paying jobs. So instead, I saw our fiscal court spend millions of dollars on a cookie factory that I understand that we have several people working over there today who, if they have a family of 3, are eligible and receive food stamps along with their paycheck because their income is so low. Now, I don't believe that we ever need to take taxpayers' dollars and coal severance taxes, tax dollars, and subsidize an industry that doesn't provide a better opportunity than that for our people. You know, it bothers me. And I tried to inject in that bill that any industry that we would subsidize or try to get to come to the county, that they would have to pay at least $2 above the minimum wage to guarantee that we did something for our people with the coal severance tax. Now, that's an element in that tax that bothers me. Another is this, you know, you can use it for a public water, or you can use it for a water line to a factory, but it doesn't guarantee that the person who lives along that route can tap into the water, and that bothers me. It doesn't, you can't spend any of it on a broken down bridge that is broken down by an overloaded coal truck. Well, you know, I hate to use, and being in transportation, since I've been in General Assembly, I hate to use gas tax dollars to repair a road that was destroyed by private industry. You know, you can say, that truck driver has a job. Yes, he does. That's right. But still, the public road is the public road, and we ought not take those dollars that are earmarked primarily for road repair to go back and clean up, if you will, destruction that's caused by a private industry or individual. It wouldn't make a difference if it's a concrete truck. They ought to have to fix it back themselves if they destroy it.
Yes.
So, you know, basically, that, I guess that's just my philosophy, is I'm a little off the beaten path for the mill-run politician. Is somehow or other, I guess it goes back to my heritage up on Long Fork Creek and growing up a coal miner's son, and you know, there are some people who would use the word conservative, and there's some who would say somebody was tight. But I guess I could say about my daddy that he's just plain stingy. You know, he liked to make sure that he got a dollar's worth for what he spent. And I think that in public service that we need to be conservative, tight, or even stingy with public dollars to guarantee that the general public get their money's worth, because after all, we pick their pockets against their will in the way of taxes, and so we ought to spend it as efficiently and effectively as we can to see that they get their money's worth from the dollars that they didn't want to give us in the first place.
That's right. That coal severance tax, that's dollars that they didn't want to give us in the first place. And when they started off, it was something like a paltry 12%. And this is like tax that comes out of the wealth here in the eastern part of Kentucky, Pike and Floyd and Johnson and Magoffin counties. And, you know, the people in this area don't want it spent building the Gene Snyder Parkway around Louisville, Kentucky. I'm sure they'd rather see it spent locally back here in the mountains. And like you said,
the reason
work those roads.
The reason I say this, though, about the workman's compensation is the mining industry is the only one that's in the special fund. And so if it is, then why shouldn't we try to help bail out the special fund to keep them having to pay their surcharge, if you will, you know, to help bail it out. So, you know, if it's dollars that's generated from the industry, then I can't see not spending some of those dollars to preserve an industry that's done so much for the people of Pike County to help them to have a bread check for their family.
Right. And you know, Clayton, you were talking about the Mountaintop Bakery, the cookie factory, which is over at Meda, Kentucky. A coal miner who has been working in the mines, making $100, $120 a day to support his family. It's a radical change if he gets laid off from that coal mining job, making $100, $120 a day because a longmore machine has gone in, or more automation in the mines has taken his job. He finds it awfully rough to go to that cookie factory and work for just a little bit above the minimum wage.
That's exactly right.
It's a radical change in lifestyle.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So you'd like to see that money on that economic development spent a little more wisely to help out more people.
Absolutely. You know, I'm one of those people that believe, if you will, in government intervention, like the road building on the Appalachian Road Program. You know, by that I'm saying that if government invests those dollars, then they provide employment for the people who work there, but they also provide employment for the people who make the case dozer They provide employment for the people who crush the stone. They provide employment for those who make the asphalt. They provide employment for all of those people who, in turn, are the people who buy the refrigerator, the washing machine, and the car that keeps other factories going across this nation. So cutting back in the Appalachian Road Program in the past 25 years is one of the things that's brought about, if you will, the great, in my opinion, the great budget deficit in Washington, because as more people are unemployed, they're paying less and less tax, and their demands become greater and greater in unemployment or food stamps or what have you. So the upfront dollars that we spent in the Appalachian Road Program were pretty productive in providing jobs all across this country. You know, that's that cybernetics effect, where what affects one area will have an adverse effect on another area. So I really think that cutting back in the Appalachian program is one of the problems this country's facing today. I'd like to see them try to fund that thing again, and let's see what happens there. One of the things we haven't talked about that I think is so important to us, unless you have some topic there you want to talk about, is I'd like to talk about roads just a little.
Well, now, you're the chairman of the House of Transportation with the Transportation Department, so I'm sure you'd like to talk about roads. Let's talk about roads, and in specific, when we talk about roads, Clayton, we want to know about 23, when it's going to be completed from Dorton to Jenkins over there to the Virginia side, and we want to know about that 119 from Pikeville over to Williamson.
Well, let me tell you first how those roads ever got even considered. Well, in 1980, when I became chairman of the House Transportation Committee, my first official act, if you will, was I took the total committee to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and looked at their road system, because they had set up a road system that I thought, it sounded fair. It was one where you build roads based on need, and I knew that the greater needs for roads were in eastern Kentucky. So we really, at that meeting down there, began to develop a bill that was later enacted in the Kentucky legislature that set up what we call a 6-year road plan. Now, we modified that thing many times. I think we have it fine-tuned now to where it has to work. But, you know, prior to that, the governor could promise any road he wanted to get elected. But the truth is, it takes a little more than 4 years to buy the right-of-way, to move the utilities, to construct the road and have it in operation. So, and the governor's only in for 4 years. So those never happen. We become right-of-way rich and road poor. An example of that is the Elkhorn City. You know, had bought most of the property up there, and then there was a suit filed up there that prohibited them from building that road because of the Clean Waters Act. And, you know, many environmental things come into play. But nonetheless, we enacted the road priority system, and we sort of removed, if you will, the governor's promises. And once they put a road in a system, it was there, and you couldn't advance another road in front of it. So 23, with the cutting back of the Appalachian Road Program, it's state financed, and it's a very expensive project. Now, you asked me about 23 onto the Virginia line. The finishing surface on that road is supposed to be, for the last leg of it, in 98. Most of it will be constructed by the end of 96. Much of it, the construction money, is in the budget we just approved.
Now, you're talking from Dorton to the top of the gap at Jenkins.
At Pound Gap.
Pound Gap with Virginia.
Yes. All right. We have some design money, if you will, on 119. 119 should be, we have one section in construction over there, I understand now, on 119. Bent Mountain, I think.
Bent Mountain is under construction right now. I can testify to that because I just went over to Belfry and over to Williamson this past week, and let me tell you, they are working on that Bent Mountain road.
But that road also is supposed to be complete by 98. I can foresee in that it may get in a 2-year lag. This is 94, so it may be the year 2004 is totally complete. I suspect that 23 that we'll be driving on it nonstop. by 98. I suspect you'll be driving to Williamson nonstop by the year 2000. I think most of it will be complete by 98, but I can foresee, that you may run into some difficulty.
And we're talking about 4 lanes. This will be
Yes,
four-lane road,
yes,
a 4-lane
yeah.
road, 119.
Yes.
On the rest of the 23 segment, and that, it's only 30 miles from Pikeville to Williamson, Clayton, but I know you've driven over that road. How long does it take you to drive from Pikeville to Williamson? You can be 2 hours on that 30 miles
Well,
sometimes.
if you get hung up on the mountain, you can be 2 hours. It's an hour's drive any day. Another project that I'm so proud of, and I mean this, is the Millard Bridge overpass.
Back when I was working at Elkhorn City, don't mean to interrupt you, but you and I talked about this on an interview show on the FM Pipeline show on WBCO. We talked about that bridge and that intersection at Millard needed to be done worse than probably any highway project in the entire United States.
I think so, and that's one of the things I guess will bother me. They'll cut the ribbon on that after I leave office, but nonetheless, the people up there can use it, and I was just glad that I could be a part of making sure that we got that in our 6-year road plan, and it will be completed in not too distant future, but probably not be completed until January 1 next year, and I'll be out of office. But nonetheless, the people up there can enjoy it, and I hope they do.
You'll be up there for that ribbon cutting ceremony, won't you?
I'm sure I will.
I'm sure you will too, and I'm sure a mutual friend of ours, Mr. Philip Epling from Elkhorn City, undoubtedly will be there too.
Yes, sir.
On that bridge and that intersection, taking care of that at Millard, I can tell you that I have sat as long as an hour in a line of traffic there. Traffic sometimes in that Millard intersection, it would be backed all the way down to Shelbyana before. I mean, 2-3 miles it would be backed up, but there's just no call for that in that.
That's right. Don, let me talk about something else aside from roads, if you will. The little things that I've worked at, as I go back over reminiscing over 20 years, was I recall when I first went to the General Assembly, one of the things that bothered me was the deaf students in Pike County. We had a couple up on the creek there that they were taken down to Danville, and they were 5-year-olds. And, the parents would take them down. In fact, I've even gone down with them a time or two. And a child that's 5 that's not blessed with speech and hearing, and you take it to a setting like that, and to even ask for a drink of water, it's homemade communication at best. They're not trained in sign language, and neither are the parents. And that bothered me. And I recall that in 1974, I filed a bill, and it was House Bill 60, I remember that also, that would require the state to set up regional prep schools for the deaf and hearing impaired. If we had done that, then we could take care of children up to about the 4th grade, say closer home. But I didn't get that bill passed, but I got a commitment from Wendell Ford, and he put money in the budget to begin, if you will, monthly transportation free for the parents to bring the children home back to the local Board of Education. They would have picked them up there. So that was in '74. Well, that went on, and they made the monthly trip for about 4 years. And then I saw a chance, a little extra money in the education budget. So I changed my bill to every 2 weeks, and that went on, and the local board started providing a bus transportation for every 2 weeks. With the enactment of CARA, when we raised tax again, I saw an opportunity, so I struck 2 and put in weekly. And so now those students who go to the School for the Blind in Louisville or the School for the Deaf in Danville, they have free transportation home and back every weekend from Pike County. That way they can still live part of their life with their parents. And so that was something that came about primarily, I guess, because 2 of my neighbors had 2 children that had to go. And I just recognized the problem and went to work on it. So in the past 20 years, I've been able to get that to where they have weekly transportation to and from there. And I thought that was awfully, awfully important to those people. It doesn't affect everybody, but those few it affects, it sure affects them a great deal.
Makes a world of difference in their lives.
Yes, it does.
Well, you saw the need there, and you did something about it, Clayton, and that's what a state legislator should do. Absolutely. Pleased to hear that. Well, let me ask you about this past Kentucky General Assembly. Before you retire here, you've been there You've been there now 21 years. Let's talk about this last legislative session. From what we read in the papers and what we've seen on the news, Clayton, that last Friday night it was chaos down there in Frankfort. I think that even the Lexington Herald Leader newspaper even called it silliness. What was going on in Frankfort last Friday?
I thought we were pretty organized from the hills. Don, one thing that our people don't know here, I guess, but there's only 3 people in the House of Representatives that was there when I went there in 1974. So that's where I stand on the seniority list. And I've also served as chairman of the Mountain Caucus, Mountain Legislators. So I could see what we were getting into, and so I called a Mountain Caucus. We got together, 13 of us, and Greg Stumbo was one of our members. And I told them at that time, I said, remember, from this hour forth in this General Assembly, is we need to put on a full court press. Now let's leave this room today saying that we will all vote as one voice. It makes no difference that we'll all vote exactly alike on every issue, because these are issues that affect us. You know, we had, in the budget, they had stripped out the project for the classroom building from Prestonburg Community College for Pikeville. That was in the budget, and they'd taken it out, and, you know, I didn't appreciate that. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes also. But, you know, just things like that that bothered me is, and I had talked about where the money could come from earlier to you, you know, by imposing back the tax on manufacturing equipment. We could have handled all of those things and not picked the pockets of any of the working people. But it bothered me somewhat that they had stripped the budget, and really it was self-serving, if you will, because by that, some of the people in the Senate who were in high places may be a farmer, and he didn't want to pay tax on a tractor. But, you know, so really it wasn't special interest out there, it was a special interest of a legislator, if you will. If, you know, don't bother me, it's all right to charge that little girl that I talked about that works at McDonald's, but then don't charge me. Well, you know, I disagree with that. I disagree with it violently. So I said, fellas, in the first place, if they remove all of our projects, they remove the $225,000 for matching money to Virginia for the Brake State Park. You know, just little things like that that could mean a little something for us. They'd taken it from the budget, so I said, let's go out there and let's vote against the budget. And we did. We lost that battle just a little, but we lost it. But then come health reform. Now, the Senate did us an injustice on health reform because they held that thing until 11:45. We cannot be in session more than 60 days. Thursday, we stayed there and didn't attend a session. Wasn't called into session, we knew that, but that was for conference committees to try to get together and work out some of the kinks in the budget and in health care. So we stayed there, you know, without pay and just waited. Then we came back in Friday, and we actually took one of our veto days for Friday to try to finish. But the Senate sent us the health reform bill at 11:45. We were supposed to leave there at 12 o'clock. Be going into another day, and we didn't have a day to go. So they stopped the clock. That meant, you know, in the House chambers, that meant that 12 o'clock wasn't 12 o'clock. You'd stay as long as you pleased. But the health reform bill was something like 182 pages. Now, I believe that we need health reform in Kentucky as much as any person who lives in Kentucky. I think we need it.
Especially in our eastern Kentucky area.
However, Don, a few years ago we enacted, if you will, a mandatory automobile liability insurance law in Kentucky. With the enactment of that, we put in no safeguards on cost containment. And everybody in Kentucky knows that your liability insurance has gone up probably 1,000%. Well, I said at the outset that I want health reform, but I won't vote for one that doesn't have cost containment in it. And I mean that. And another thing that I've gotten roughed up over is healthcare had the provider's tax in it. Well, all doctors and hospitals disagreed. You know, we shouldn't have to pay. Well, the truth is that federal Medicaid, Medicare pumps into Kentucky something like $600 million. But we have to match that to a certain percentage. We have to have $150 million of matching money. We shouldn't go out there and pick the pockets of the little old girl that works at McDonald's again, in order that the providers can receive back $750 million in a year. You know, they need to be willing to put up something to ensure that we get the $600 million from the federal government. Because they're the people who get those dollars, not you and me. We don't get Medicare. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
So I voted for the provider's tax when it went over. It was tied to health care without the provision of some sort of cost containment. And again, I advise the Mountain Caucus, the Mountain Delegation, is we have a twofold reason to be against the budget this time. One is they took out that provision for cost containment, and the other is that it has the provider's tax in it, and if we don't vote for the provider's tax, then we put the budget back in, we have to open the budget back up, and if we do, we may be able to get our projects. Now, you know, you can...
When you say our projects, you're talking about the project there with the Prestonsburg Community College and Pikeville. In specific, and that project and the Break Center State Park project.
But see, the media many times will eat you up on that, and they'll call it pork. You know, it's a pork project. It's not a pork project for me, for us to be able to educate people in Pikeville in a state-supported school where the tuition is about 1/5 what it is at Pikeville College. And I'm not anti-Pikeville College, but I just believe that we need, that if Kentucky schools are for Kentuckians, that just because our people live in Pike County and so far removed, we ought not be deprived if we can bring the school there to educate our people for what they can be educated for in Lexington. And the University of Kentucky and Eastern Kentucky University are just 25 miles apart. So if you live anywhere on I-75, you can only be 12.5 miles at the most from either one of those universities. And some of our students go farther than that to high school in Pike County.
Absolutely, they do.
So, you know, what I'm saying is our people need that opportunity. So we needed to open that budget back up to make sure that we get our projects. And of course, I thought the representative from up in Knott County summed it up real well. He said, you know, they can call it pork, they can call it anything they want to, but we in the hills have lived on commodity cheese long enough that a little pork would taste pretty good. Said, so let's just stick to our guns and try to get some of it.
We like to have a little something to laugh.
That's right.
A little bit of the gravy, huh?
That's right. So
it's on the gravy train for a change.
I sort of agreed with that statement. I thought it was pretty good.
Okay. Well, now, Clayton, the state legislature is recessed for right now. The House of Representatives and the state Senate, you're in recess, I think sometime Friday night. So how long is it before you go back?
We go back on the 15th to look at any bills that the governor vetoes.
That's Income Tax Day you go back on?
I think that's right. That's right.
Okay.
But anyway, we go back on the 15th to look at these vetoes.
Yeah.
I suspect, Dr. Don, that sometime in early June, I suspect he'll call us back into a special session to try to do something to correct the budget problems.
Yeah.
I do not expect us on the 15th to try to suspend any rules and approve the health reform bill. I do not expect him to.
Well,
there's some talk of that, but
the budget and the health reform bill are the two main topics that you guys will definitely be taking up when you do go back on April 15th.
Well, we may and we may not. If he vetoes the budget, we'll have to do something. But, you know, you can operate on a continuing budget until July anyway, so we could have us back in special session, go over the rewriting of a budget, which I'd be willing to do that.
Has the governor said that the budget, that he will veto it? Has he said that, or how does
Well, he said he would, then he said he wouldn't, and I don't know what he'll do.
So he's, to use this word, he's waffling, I guess.
Yes,
There's a terminology.
I guess he's trying to determine which strategy to use.
Right, okay. Well, now, these laws that have been passed in the Kentucky State Legislature in the House by the representatives such as you and by our state senators, these laws, the governor has already signed some of these bills into law, which means they take effect this year. I think the seatbelt law is one that he has signed.
It goes into effect. It goes into effect July the 13th. That's 90 days after. Well, probably the 15th now, because 13th is supposed to be the last day, so it's 15th. I think it'll go into effect July the 15th.
So that's already signed that one.
Yes, but here again, that's another issue that I've probably been a poor politician on, because tied to the seatbelt bill, I filed an amendment that would mandate a 25% reduction in your automobile liability insurance, because when they brought that bill before the Transportation Committee for 3 or 4 years, we never get it out of committee, was insurance companies would say that 67% of the claims they pay because that somebody wasn't buckled up. Well, I sort of felt like that if we mandate that somebody buckles up and it would save them 67%, is they ought to at least be willing to give back that consumer about 25% of that, and that still leaves them 42% profit if what they were saying was true. Of course, my insurance amendment didn't get on the bill, and I could never support it because of that. I know health and safety is awfully important. I know that. But I also know that our forefathers come to this country for freedom. And I've said many times that if they were here today, the greatest thing they could see would be the jet airplane. Till they could catch that bird and get home quick to King George and tell him they're sorry that they rebelled, that he was not near as oppressive as our government regulations as of today.
Rapidly has become so, Clayton. Absolutely has become so. Too many laws means less freedom.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that bothers me. And I've always been that advocate of the rights of people, whether it's on their surface or whether it's their right to buckle up.
Pretty soon we may have a law that says, hey, look, you got to chew your food at least 24 times before you swallow because you could choke and die.
Well, there are those who argue that causes your insurance to go up because of that. But so does obesity. Maybe they ought to stop some of us from eating some. Certainly, smoking, if it's what it is, maybe we ought to outlaw smoking, all those things.
Hey, there's a group that's coming for your cigarettes. You can better believe it.
Well, I know, but I mean, I only said that in jest. I'm saying that if health insurance is that important, then maybe nobody should be overweight. Maybe we should starve them. Make sure that they don't get overweight, because they're being overweight will cause my insurance to go up because they have to use it more.
The same line of reasoning, isn't it, huh?
The same thing.
I mean, it's an analogy. It's the same line of reasoning.
That's right.
I think, though, that probably the seatbelt was passed this time because the federal government said that, they were going to withhold road funds from the road program if Kentucky didn't pass the seatbelt law.
Well, of course, I'm always real good at rationalizing. I've been chairman of the Transportation Committee when the federal representative came and talked to us about that. And talked about the deaths on the highway, and he said, they would take some of our dollars and we'd have to put it into an education program for safety to encourage people to buckle up. And I said, maybe those dollars could be better spent to correct some of the bad curves in the mountains in Pike County, or take care of some of the intersections where they had the most accidents. And that way there wouldn't be the accidents there, and we wouldn't have that health problem there either. So the dollars you're talking about to advertise with, maybe we could, and talk about safety, maybe we could just make a safer road for them to operate on, and that would serve the same purpose.
I heard that. I'm with you. I'm with you on that one. Clayton, was there anything passed down there? We've heard all of this about, smoking cigarettes and cigarette smoking and secondhand smoke and public buildings and so forth. I know that was brought up on the floor.
Yes, there was a bill passed. There was a bill passed, and it mandated. The governor had sort of said that you couldn't smoke in a public building, have it smoke free. And I think the General Assembly enacted legislation that would say that it's fine to have one smoke-free, but you also have to have a smoking place. To
provide those people who do smoke cigarettes, who use tobacco products, they've got to have a place to do it.
That's right.
So that's the gist of that law.
Yes, that's right.
And we have the seatbelt law, which has been passed.
I think what they said, Don, and that was what's fair for the goose is fair for the gander. And so, if you don't smoke, then you don't have to come in our smoking room. Just provide us a place to smoke.
Provide us
I
a
don't
place.
smoke myself, so
Well.
you know, I didn't get in that fray.
Well, it's got to come down to the question, do smokers have rights or do they not have rights, you know?
That's right.
And obviously you're not going to be able to outlaw tobacco or tobacco products because you can't put everybody in jail that uses them. There's just too many people.
That's right.
Although, you know, the government might want to do that and pay half of the people to lock up the other half to watch them.
That's right.
But let's talk about some other bills that have been passed. I think there was a measure that came up that was passed on abortion. What was that?
It was a parental consent, and you know, that bill bothered me too. It bothered me. You know, I absolutely do not believe in abortion in any fashion. But you know, the same day that we voted on that bill, I saw where a fella in Lebanon, in Kentucky, had molested his daughter, and she got pregnant.
So this is incest. She's pregnant.
That's
by
right.
incest.
All right. 15 years later, he molested his granddaughter, and she got pregnant. All right. Now this began back in sometime in the 60s, but in '92, he molested his great-granddaughter, and she told on him. Okay. Now our bill would say that you know that a parent has to sign. What do you do to that little girl who was molested by her father, and then he has to sign for her to have an abortion? What, you know? I heard a Methodist minister, and he said, "I'm talking out of character. I should be saying absolutely no abortion in no fashion." But he said, "I'd like to tell this committee today that if you make controls so stringent that the girl cannot have an abortion, she can't talk to her parents, she can't talk to a judge, and she takes her life." Said, "I hope that this body will be the people who have to be the pallbearers that day. And I hope every step of the way that somebody is telling you, remember, you took 2 lives instead of 1. Now, you know, that's far out. But Don, there's so many things intertwined in the life of today's children. And my work with the school system has been Director of Health and Social Services for many years. And we have so many broken homes. And we have so many children who don't live with their parents. That how can they ever relate to somebody in a time of crisis when they can't relate to them otherwise? So there has to be a better way. Now, as I say, I oppose abortion, totally. I do oppose abortion. But then again, I have to look and see what are we doing to the lives of some individuals.
Everything is not just in black and white.
That's exactly right.
Everything is not in black and white.
That's a very, very, very complex issue. Every situation is a different question, in my honest opinion.
Well, then, you know, there is such a thing, you know, as pro-choice, and the government not mandating everything in everybody's personal lives.
For every case, it's a different situation, and has to be dealt with differently.
Is the governor going to sign that bill, or do you know?
Well, I think he will. In fact, I think I saw in today's paper that he did yesterday.
Okay, tell us in the language of the bill what the abortion bill says.
It would require that any girl under 18 would have to have her parents to sign before she could have an abortion, or get permission from a judge.
And that's what the law.
That's right.
That's the way that it may be. Okay. Well, let's talk about another major thing that was passed there, and then this is certainly one that should concern quite a few people in eastern Kentucky. I know I've been asked about it, and this is the Workers' Compensation Reform Bill that was passed. I think Representative Ron Cyrus, who is from Flatwoods, who was singer Billy Ray Cyrus's father, said that this is the most wide, broad-ranging workers' comp reform bill that has been passed of all the 50 states in the United States.
Well, Ron Cyrus is certainly a very knowledgeable person in workman's comp. He's been chairman of the Labor and Industry Committee that I happen to be on, and worked in the workman's comp legislation. So, you know, I know quite a bit about what we did. Was we set up for the first time a state fund. Now, the state fund is an alternative, if you will, and it really cuts at the heart of an insurance company that overcharges. By that I'm saying that you can join the state pool and have workman's compensation, and maybe have it cheaper. But for those people out there who are concerned about workman's compensation, we did cut benefits some. We cut the some of the bad things, and some of the things that I really didn't want to support was, but it only affects people who get compensation after this law becomes effective. By that I'm saying, if for someone out in the listening area who says, well, do my benefits get cut? I've been drawing workman's compensation for 10 years. It has no bearing on anybody, who files before July the 15th. Your rib benefit package, now that's where if you have stage 1 black lung, you know, you want to, and you go back to work, that you can draw that for 428 weeks, is really, now you will have to get in some sort of training program for a different occupation. But another provision in that is at age 65, you lose 10% of your workman's compensation until you're age 70, which means after age 70, you would only receive 40% of your workman's compensation benefits. Now, you know, in that, really, workman's compensation is for injured workers. When a person's 65, they're no longer classified as being on the job market. They could be on full Social Security.
Getting ready to retire, for sure.
But my argument against that is this, is if a person gets hurt at age 50, and he doesn't work for 15 years until he's 65, and then he gets Social Security, is he hasn't paid in Social Security in the past 15 years when the wages were higher. His benefits are less. So, you know, that bothers me, to say that we're going to take some of your workman's compensation when you get 65 because you can get Social Security, but really your Social Security you receive won't be very much. And so for that, they were going to strike it all out by age 70, but we finally left 40% in. And of course, that provision I did not like. But here again, if you look at justice, you're not on the labor market. And workman's compensation fund is in such a dire straits that we're going to have to do something to keep it afloat. There's not going to be a workman's compensation in Kentucky.
Absolutely, it's become to a crisis point, and we've been seeing and hearing about it.
It is in crisis stage.
Not becoming, it already is there.
That's right.
It's already
it is
in
crisis stage. That's correct.
So what do we do about that, Clayton? How do we alleviate that? Are the lawyers taking too much money on these workers' comp cases?
Well, you know, you have to look at that 3 or 4 different ways. Of course, the most an attorney can get is $15,000. That seems like a pretty good pot in a workman's comp claim. But I don't know how you solve the problem. We did, we hopefully cut back on the doctor's expense quite a bit. So there is some savings in the bill. There's about 12% savings over the present workman's compensation. So they think they have solved the crisis now to the year 2000 anyway.
And then when it gets to be 2000, which isn't that far off, hey, we'll worry about it tomorrow. It's like Scarlett O'Hara and Gone with the Wind. I'll think about it tomorrow. Okay. Right. Well, it's been a very busy session down there, and you are recessed, of course, in Frankfort, and then go back on April the 15th, at which time, of course, the budget is going to come up, and so is the health care, and of course that's a major issue that you got to talk about. But let's go back and talk about some of the bills that have already been passed. I think some other bills that have been passed down there. There was a sodomy law. Was that passed, or was that just
sodomy?
Bill fought, or what?
Sodomy did not.
That did not even. No. That didn't pass. So that's.
No, I would have voted for the anti-sodomy legislation. You know, if it ever got to a point where I could vote for it, yes, I would. I would certainly vote for anti-sodomy.
And that was Senator Tim Philpott, I think.
Well, Jim Bruce filed it in the House, but it never got out of committee, and I'm not on committee that it's in, but I would have voted for it.
Okay. And I think there was also some laws passed, something about tobacco and cigarettes and vending machines or something like that.
That was in that was in the smoking bill we talked about, where you had to have the smoking area if you have a non-smoking, and the vending machine. The federal government is going to withhold something like $9 million if we don't come with some system to keep from selling cigarettes to children under 18, And so the vending machines all have to be within sight, if you will, of the cashier. Make sure that that an underage child don't step up and buy a cigarette. You can't sell them to them across the counter, but you could get them from the vending machine. So now the vending machines have to be within sight of the cashier.
Of course, again, on this hand, passing another law is certainly not going to stop the practice.
No.
It may help a little bit, but you know, whether the vending machine is in the view of a person who owns that establishment or not, they can always go out and get their older brother or sister
sure.
or somebody to go buy them.
Sure.
So it's not going to take care of that problem.
Sure.
Crime and guns. We've heard a lot about gun control. We know that the Brady bill has been enacted now on a national level. Was there anything locally done about crime and gun control?
You know, we made it a felony to have a gun on school property, and that should have happened.
I think locally we had a case like that in Pike County that the news.
I understand you did. But
So,
you know, you had this child go in down in Carter County and shoot a teacher and a custodian. So we did enact a law that makes it a felony to have a gun on school property. It doesn't make any difference. You know, if it's at a ball game or classroom or what have you, only peace officers can have it.
And was there also a bill passed about some particular type of ammunition or something like that?
There was some ammunition tied to it, but really and truly, that's a little.
But nothing major.
No.
Nothing major. Anything else besides the workers' comp and that was passed down there that we need to talk about that was in the legislative session this year?
No, I believe we've covered all those things that are of major importance. Of course, you always have a little old bills that they say don't help anybody, don't hurt anybody. I know there was one bill that I opposed, and it finally got killed, and it was one that would bring in a building code. And of course, I used an illustration I recall in talking about that bill where you'd have to have your home inspected. In building one, you'd have to have it inspected about 3 different times. You know, your foundation, they'd inspect it, then they would inspect the studs, and then they would inspect the wiring, and each inspection was $100. And so I said, supposing that I have somebody in my county that lives in the house with his mother-in-law, and she gives him a little piece of ground out behind the house in the garden for him to build a house, and so he's working every day. And he'll go by the lumber mill and he'll pick up him a load of materials and with whatever dollars he's got left that payday, and he'll start to build him a house. And he may just build 2 rooms before he gets his family out there. So do they have to come and inspect that and him pay $100 instead of buying materials? Then they'd have to pay another $100 and get the walls up instead of buying any roof. You know, really and truly, you need to go out in the real world and see how some people live. And I said, I'm not exaggerating the situation. Those things happen in Pike County, and I'm not looking down on them. I'm admiring them for trying to find a place where they can get their children in the dry, out from under somebody else's roof. And it doesn't bother me to tell you that those things happen in Pike County. I'm not degrading them. I'm complimenting them for being that kind of people.
Absolutely, Clayton. We got to have something.
So that bill finally died, so our people don't have to have the garage inspected.
Yes. There's 2 types of laws, Clayton. There's good laws and there's bad laws.
That's right.
There's a lot of bad laws on the books that maybe ought to be thrown out and taken off of there instead of worrying about all of the new ones
That's exactly
that
right.
come along.
That's exactly right.
So, all right. 21 years as a Kentucky state legislator. Clayton, I got to ask you one more thing here before we wrap up the interview. We've really covered a lot of ground, a lot of topics here, and this is flood control. And I know the folks, you know, I've been going over and filming these flood meetings that they've been having over in the Tug River Valley area. I'm talking about Buskirk, Burnwell, Freeburn, McCarr, and those areas there. Can you give us an update and then tell us what the flood?
The $5 million that we need in matching money over there is in the budget that we have hanging down there. It's in it because it's a safety factor, and that's in the budget.
So those people there in Buskirk, they're going to be taken care of.
That's not pork. That's a necessity.
They're going to be taken care of.
Okay. That's in the budget.
Yeah. And any word about possible construction sometime in the future of a dam in Hayside, Dickinson County?
I know nothing about that. That's federal, and I really couldn't tell you.
And that's been talked about and talked about and talked about.
Yes, that's right.
You know, and when the river got up within 1.5 foot of flood stage in Pikeville twice this year, people do take concern.
But I'm not that knowledgeable as to what the federal government's going to do. The deficits they have up there, I doubt if they'll be spending a great deal of money.
Budget time, budget
That's
time.
right.
And of course, on April the 15th, when you go back to Frankfurt, you and your fellow state legislators down there will be taking up that issue of the budget and talking about health care.
I think that's right.
And trying to get everything taken care of. We've been talking today with Kentucky State Representative Clayton Little from the 93rd Congressional District, representing Eastern Kentucky in the House of Representatives in our state capital in Frankfurt. Clayton has been there 21 years. He's a 21-year veteran of the Kentucky State Legislature, has a high position of seniority there. But Clayton, this is your last year. You're retiring at the end of this year. And of course, we've got a state race coming up. When you retire, somebody's got to be in there. There'll never be anybody there that can replace you, but somebody is going to be a legislator from the 93rd District. And of course, we have three candidates that are on the ballot for that. We have Kelsey Friend Jr., Virgil Osborne, and Greg Johnson, and they're all three Democrats. One of those Democrats is going to be on there because no Republican has filed for the office. Now, this election is coming up on May the 24th, so we don't have to wait until November to find out who's going to be in that seat there that you have held. As of May the 24th, which isn't that long off, somebody, one of those three candidates is going to be down there. And what are your feelings on the race? You want to tell us about it?
You know, if you're asking me for an endorsement, you know, I couldn't come out here and say, yes, I'm for this one or I'm opposed to that one. But you said at the outset that somebody to fill my shoes. Of course, nobody will ever fill my shoes. They may do a better job in the Kentucky General Assembly than I have. But they won't fill the same shoes that I fill, because I think I'm a rare breed, and I mean that.
Absolutely, Clayton.
I think I'm a rare breed. Now, I think I've done what's right. If I had to go back and look at every vote I've cast in the past 21 years, Don Bevins, I'll tell you today that I wouldn't change my vote on one issue, because every vote I've ever cast has come directly from the heart. I thought I was right then. If I was right then, I'm right now. And I mean that. And I've taken on the tough issues, and we've discussed many of them. We've discussed the unmined minerals tax. We've discussed the broad form deed. You know, we've discussed the real tough gut issues that affect the dollars in Pike County, if you will. And by that, I'll say to you that I do have a preference in this race. And my preference is this, that I want the person to replace me who has lived more closely, if you will, the life that I've lived, the person who's had to work for a living. And I'm not saying that all three candidates haven't had to work. They've done a different nature of work, if you will, than the kind of work that I've done. And I think that if you represent the rank and file in Pike County, that you would have had to have walked in their shoes. You would have had to have known what the knocks of life are. You would have to know how it feels to be up and going each day to work. There's some professional people running, there's some business people running, and there's somebody who, you know, have worked running. And I think that the people need to look at that and see which philosophy that they really want to represent them in state government. Now, I know that I have represented, in my heart, I know that I've represented that philosophy which my daddy, if you will, raised me to represent. As I said, I recall his coming home from the coal mines. I remember his day's work, and I know all about that. And I've done that. I haven't worked in the mines, but I've worked every day of my life. And I feel like the rank and file in Pike County are real hard-working people. And I think they respect work. I think they respect integrity. I think they respect those things that when people live like they live. If you want to know what a person will do in public office, don't listen to them a month before the election. Look at them 10 years past, because I'll guarantee you that anybody who seeks public office will try to win. And I'll guarantee you that after they are elected, Dr. Don, if their heart goes back to where it was. Now, where were they 10 years ago on issues? Will they change the story to get elected? If they do, if they change their story, different from their lifestyle, once they get in public office, their service will be back to their lifestyle. I may not have made this clear, but I hope I have, that I just want Pike County to be represented. If I have any voice in it, for the rank and file, the common folk of Pike County. And Pike Counties do have a choice. They can look at the candidates and they can decide, and I trust their judgment.
Thank you, Clayton. It's been a wonderful interview. We've gone over 21 years Kentucky State Legislator in Clayton Little, representing Pike County, Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky, and the Kentucky State Legislature in Frankfort. He's done a marvelous job. Again, some of the highlights he considered to be the highlights was the passage of the natural gas and the oil bill about surface owners' rights. And this 1994 Kentucky State Legislature, the 1988 broad form deed, just some of the highlights of Kentucky State Legislator or State Representative in Clayton Little. Up there with the seniority in the Kentucky State Legislature, also the chairman of the House Transportation Committee, and Pike County Administrator for the Pike County Kentucky Schools, State Representative in Clayton Little. Clayton is retiring this year. And Clayton, again, thank you so much for this marvelous interview. And hey, congratulations, and our accolades and our hats are off to you for the terrific job that you have done in the state capitol in Frankfort for us.
Again, I say to you, I've done my best. I hope people know that.
All right. Thank you, Clayton.
Thank you.
I'm Dr. Donald Bevins for WPRG Telecom and Intermountain Cable Television and our public affairs talk show here that we call Current Affairs and Today's Issues. Again, thank you for joining us.